All right, now because you seem so keen on it, everybody say hello to YouTube. Thank you.
First.
All right, so we're going to be talking about animators today. And in this project, I haven't set up a whole lot, so it's a little bit clearer on my screen because you're not missing the edges. But basically right now, all I've got is a camera. I have the 2D standard assets that you guys have seen with the Robot Boy animation that we've done before. So what my goal is today is to take two of the robot animations and create a transition between them. So we're going to start out with the robot having an idle animation where he's just standing around. And then we're going to, when we press the A or the D key and move left or right, we're going to apply the appropriate running animation that we need. So I'm going to start out by creating the animation like we've done before, the idling animation. So here's our robot idle animation. There's not a whole lot that happens. He basically just, his shoulders move a little bit, but it's something to get us started. So just like in previous videos, I'm going to grab all these frames. I'm going to bring them into the video, into the scene. And when I do that, I get the option to create an animation. So I'm going to call this robot idle. And I am going to save it in my, is the right project? Yep, 2D Animator, Animations folder. And just like we saw in the previous video, this doesn't just create a single animation file, which is this guy, but it also creates an animation controller. The animation controller is the piece that's actually going to allow us to move between animations. And so I want to open that up real quick so you guys can see what it looks like. If we double click on an animation controller, it gives us the animator view. And in the animator view, we have a bunch of orange, and you'll see in a moment, gray rectangles that represent the different states of animation. Right now, we just have one. The robot stands there and idles, and that's it. So what I'm going to do, I'm also going to change a couple names here because they don't make a whole lot of sense. I'm going to change the object's name to Robot Boy. And this animation controller right now is called Robot Boy Idle 00. But this controller is actually going to handle all of the Robot Boy's animations. So I'm just going to call it Robot Boy. And if we select the Robot Boy in the scene view and go to his inspector, we can see that an animator component has been added to the Robot Boy. So while most objects will have multiple .anim or animation files, they should typically have only one animation controller. And the animation controller will allow you to jump between different animations. And so I'm going to also save a little bit of time here by using the animations already provided by the 2D package. So you can see that in the standard assets, the 2D standard assets, they've already made animation files for all of the different Robot Boy animations. But you guys could get these files just by doing the same thing that we just did, taking the frames, dragging them into the scene editor, and that'll generate the animation file for us. So basically what I want to do is I want to take this Robot Boy run animation, and I want to make it so that when I move left or right, the robot run animation plays as opposed to the idling animation. So the first thing I'm going to do is show you guys the script that I've created. Maybe. So here's the script. Right now it doesn't do a whole lot. I check the horizontal axis, and then I move the Robot Boy based on what the value of the horizontal axis is. But right now, if I attach this script to Robot Boy, his only animation is the idle animation. So if I move him around, he doesn't really do anything. He just kind of hangs out. And it's really hard to see from there, but his idle animation just has his head move and his arms move ever so slightly. And that's all he does right now, just slide around. So we need to go into our animator view and create another state. Each of these rectangles that you guys see, except for entry and any state, we don't care about those guys. But each of the rectangles that we add represent a different state or a different type of animation that the robot should be doing. So I'm going to right click in here, I'm going to say create state, and I'm going to make an empty state. My hope before the year is over, I want to do 3D animations also, and that's going to use this thing called a blend tree, but we don't care about blend trees for now. We're just going to use an empty state to create our animation. And this state needs some pieces of information. It needs to know when it's got to move from idling to running, and so I'm going to call this robot run. And it also needs, where it says none under motion, it needs to know what animation is going to be applied. So I'm going to go to my animations folder, I'm going to grab run, and I'm going to pop it into the motion section of my animation. So now robot run is hanging out there, it's gray, it's not hooked up to anything. So we need to create what's called a transition between the idle and the run. And even though we are recording this live for YouTube, because we are in class today, if anybody has any questions while we go, we don't usually get this opportunity. So feel free to ask questions if you guys have any, if any of this doesn't make sense. But basically, we need to set up a transition here. And we can see that there's a list of transitions that's empty right now. So I'm going to make a couple. I'm going to right-click my robot run and say make transition. Then I'm just going to drag this to the idle. And then I need to create a transition the other way, because obviously my character is going to go from standing still to running and then standing still again. So I need to make sure I have transitions in both directions. In my opinion, the most confusing thing about running transitions in Unity is that we have to create a special variable whose only job is to determine when the transition happens. So over here, we have two different views. One's called layers. We're not worried about that. The other is called parameters. Parameters allow us to specify extra variables that are going to determine when this animation happens. So I'm going to add a float variable, and I'm going to call it speed. Now the tricky thing about these variables is that we do have access to them in our code, but we have to access them through the component. So if you remember when we've done stuff before, retrieving components from a given game object, we've had to use that getComponent method. We're going to have to do the same thing here. So I'm going to create an animator variable. And in the start method, I'm going to set that animator variable equal to the animator component attached to my robot boy. So this variable is going to hold on to that speed value, and it's going to handle all of the methods that transition between animations. So basically what I'm going to do is, if the speed is positive, in other words, if the character is moving, then I want to transition my animation. Once the speed drops below a certain value, I'm not going to do 0 exactly, because we know that there's some leeway there between when I let go of the key and stuff kind of winds down. So I'm going to use 0.05 as my value. So if the speed gets above 0.05, I want him to start running. If the speed drops below 0.05, I want him to stop running. So the way that I do that is by selecting one of the transitions and setting up a condition based on my speed. So this is going from idle to running. So I'm going to add a condition that says if speed is greater than 0.05, this transition should happen. Now, the thing that gets a little, not really tricky, but I think the thing that's easily lost in translation here is that Unity is constantly checking this variable for us. So as soon as we modify the speed variable, Unity applies the appropriate transition. As soon as that variable goes above 0.05, this transition between animations will automatically happen. All we have to do is specify the variable and what value we're looking for. So then obviously my condition for going the other way should be a speed that is less than 0.05. And these are just values that I've played around with before, and I know that they look okay. Obviously, you guys can change the values based on your needs. But this speed value is basically just going to be set to whatever the axis, the horizontal axis is. So when the horizontal axis gets fast enough, then we start animating a run. And as soon as we let go of the key and that horizontal axis drops, then we're going to stop running. Okay. So we've got our transitions set up. We've got our states set up. So let's write some code. So horizontal is the value of my horizontal axis. I know that I need to take this animation component or animator component and I need to tell it to add its or set its speed variable to be the value of the horizontal axis. So to set any parameter in our animator, we call set and then the specific type associated with that parameter. So in this case, my speed is a floating point number, so I'm going to say set float, and then I'm going to tell it I want to set the speed float to the value of horizontal. However, with the way that my condition's set up, there's a problem here. Does anybody see what that problem's going to be? If I set my speed to the horizontal value, oh, and what's wrong? Right, if I'm going left, the horizontal value becomes negative, which means it's below 0.05, so my animation is not going to trigger. So I'm just going to use a little math here and set the float equal to the absolute value of the horizontal axis. So that way, positive or negative, I'm just getting the amount of speed. If he's going 0.1 left or right, I'm going to get positive 0.1 in that case. So now, hopefully, this should work. So right now he does nothing, and as soon as he starts moving, so 0.5 might be a little low. Let's update this a little bit. So speed is math.abs horizontal, set float. That's really laggy. I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this because obviously it's just a matter of adjusting numbers, which you guys can do on your own. I just want to make sure I didn't overlook something obvious. 0.05, 0.05. Nope. So I could lower those numbers and hopefully make that lag. Make that lag a little bit less, but we can see that it works. So as the speed increases, as I get moving up to that speed, then the animation transitions, and when I let go and the axis falls below that value, my animation transitions back to the idle. Oh, this is why that's not working properly. There's a little bubble here called has exit time. We want to get rid of that. So has exit time represents like a transition time. There's a little bit of a buffer there where it takes some time for the animation to go to work, and we don't want that to happen. We want it to be nearly instantaneous. Okay, so the other problem is we still can't go left. If I start moving right, everything looks fine. If I start going left, then my robot is moonwalking, right? And we don't want that. We want him to actually flip. However, there is no, if we go to our sprites, there's no sprite sheet for running the other way. So we could, if we wanted to, duplicate this sprite sheet, use an image editor to flip it around, and create another state, which is running left. But we don't have to do that. So this is a little trick that only works with 2D. If this were 3D, we would go about it a little bit differently. But there's also a component attached called a sprite renderer. And so I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to set the sprite renderer equal to the sprite renderer attached to this game object. And all I'm going to do is if the horizontal value is negative, I'm going to call a special property of SR called flip X. So all this does is take my sprite and flip it along the horizontal axis. So if I set flip X equal to true, then my sprite is going to go the other way. Else if horizontal is greater than 0, sr.flip X equals false. So this first set of code, if I'm going to the left, then we flip it, and then as soon as I start going right again, we reverse the flip. We put me back to the sprite sheet going right. So let's check this to make sure it works. So we're moving right. Oh, come on. We're moving right. Looks good. Doesn't look good. Hopefully that's all it is. There we go. Yep, I didn't save. So running to the right, and I turn around, I run to the left. I let go, and I idle to the right. I turn around and let go, and I idle to the left. So that flip, that one line of code, or a couple lines of code, to determine whether or not we flip, saves us a lot of time from having to make a whole separate sprite sheet and a whole separate state just to change our animations. Keep in mind this only works with 2D sprites. If we have 3D models that are moving around, we're going to handle animations in a slightly different way, using those blend trees and using different animation techniques. But 3D animation is a lot more complex than 2D animation, which is why we're starting here, and hopefully we'll have enough time before the end of the year to talk about how we can make some 3D models do this kind of stuff using animation and animators. Okay, so I think we're able to transition back and forth. I think that's all we have. So quick video today. Everybody say goodbye to YouTube.
Peace out. Bye.
Thank you.